Now we turn our attention to a conversation that I don't really want to have. Andrew Mitchell has become Shadow Foreign Secretary. He steps up from Deputy, which means that David Cameron has got his trotters up in Nice again. David Cameron has done one. He has slung his hook. We need to play the Danny Dyer clip, don't we? With Danny Dyer clip, can we break out the Danny Dyer clip? Because he's done it again. David Cameron he's cleared off to Nice to put his trotters up, the twerp. And it focuses attention once again upon David Cameron's role in this country's national decline since 2015, when he was absolutely cock-a-hoop about his election victory against Ed Miliband. Indeed, he famously warned that we must vote for him in order to avoid chaos with Ed Miliband. I mean, in a world of counterfactuals, who wouldn't take chaos with Ed Miliband over what they have done instead? And of course, in the aftermath of Brexit, David Cameron was widely perceived as having fled the scene of his own crime, although no one put it quite as well as Danny Dyer.
Going back to this whole Brexit thing, when you know you're judging them on Brexit, they don't know nothing about it. Who knows about Brexit?
Yeah, quite.
No one's got a clue what Brexit is. Yeah, you watch Question Time. It's comedy.
Were you no clearer when Jeremy Corbyn explained
No, I got
Labour's
the clue.
policy?
No one knows what it is. It's like this mad riddle that no one knows what it is, right? So what's happened to that David Cameron who called it on? Let's be fair.
I think you're referring to our former Prime Minister.
Yeah, but how comes he can scuttle off? He called all this on.
Yeah.
Yeah?
He has no regrets.
Where is he? He's in Europe, in Nice, with his trotters up. Yeah? Where is the geezer? I think he should be held accountable for it. He should be held accountable for it.
It's a valid point. A lot of people do feel that all politicians...
We could probably lose the last few seconds of that. Well, no, you can't, because you get the final bleep in there, but you can't hear what the final bleep is. You have to just imagine him wrapping his jaws around that word and delivering it with such undiluted venom. Very rarely do I regret the fact that I appear, or we share our time together in daylight hours, or indeed on a properly regulated platform. Because if this was an internet show, indeed, there's quite often some profanity on my Full Disclosure podcast because the rules are different. But very, very rarely does that bother me. But I wish, you can find it, and I'm sure you've heard it before. But my goodness me, we must get him on. The only downside, do you know what the only downside of that clip is? Do you know what the only downside of it is? He obviously doesn't listen to us. Because literally impossible to arrive at the conclusion that nobody knew what was going to happen with Brexit if you've been listening to this show since 2016. So I can live with that. Admiration doesn't have to be mutual, but I would love to get him on Full Disclosure. Quite a few of you suggesting that we absolutely must. So where is the geezer? Well, until yesterday he was back in the Foreign Office and the House of Lords. I don't want to phrase the question like this, but I don't think I've got much choice. Has he got away with it? Has David Cameron got away with being one of the worst contributors to British politics in 50 years, 100 years, ever? Because through a combination of luck and circumstance, so many people have come along after him who were more obviously awful or more obviously responsible for the mess, that David Cameron sort of gets off the hook. So, who would you pick on this? You know, if you still think Brexit was a good idea, then realistically you should be carrying David Cameron around the room on your shoulders, not Nigel Farage. If you think that the decline of government was a consequence of Boris Johnson getting into the House of Commons, then you might be blaming Boris Johnson, not David Cameron. But David Cameron's more responsible for Brexit than Nigel Farage and more responsible for the decline of UK government than Boris Johnson. Could you have created an ecosystem in which Liz Truss could become Prime Minister if David Cameron hadn't bet the House on a referendum in order to stop whatever the current iteration of the anti-EU racist party is from winning a seat or keeping a seat in Clacton, for example, which was Douglas Carswell's constituency when he was a UKIP MP. And in order to stop other people from defecting in the way that Douglas Carswell had defected, he decided to promise the right wing of his party a referendum on EU membership. And we all know how that worked out. And you track the corruption, the decline, the normalization of lies, the abandonment of reality, the attack upon standards. You track all of that from, well, it depends how you're feeling, frankly. Do you track it from the referendum result? In which case, in a way, he's off the hook, albeit that the Remain campaign was pretty lackluster and he was supposed to be doing it in conjunction with Jeremy Corbyn, who refused to be in the same room as him, if memory serves. Or do you track it from the decision to call the referendum? I think you track it from the decision to call the referendum. So 40 minutes after 11 is the time. He has left the front bench. He's probably returned to his, was it a gypsy caravan that he was reported to have installed in one of his back gardens in order to write his memoirs. And he becomes now the subject of political historians. It's the shortest comeback I can remember, politically speaking, and it is now over. How will history judge David Cameron is perhaps the more obvious way to ask this question. But I think that leaves far too much room for a pretense of positivity. The man is a moron for not foreseeing what anybody could have told him would happen in the context of trying to pander to the fantasy mongerers to the right of his own ideological position. Brexit wouldn't, and we'll go through all of this, but one of the main reasons why Brexit happened, and remember, if you still think Brexit was a good idea, then you should love David Cameron. So in some ways, it's for you to work out why you don't. Shepherd's Hut. Austerity. This extraordinary combination of hubris, arrogance and entitlement, which meant that they would suck the marrow out of the country, closing social capital hubs, closing libraries, closing Sure Start centres, defunding councils to a degree that they simply couldn't provide some basic services, ripping the heart out of some communities, and then wondering why in 2016 members of those communities turned around and sought to give the government, which was allied with the Remain campaign, sought to give the government a bloody nose. It's the most overlooked element of, well, it's not overlooked. It's just probably not discussed as much as it should be. Of the whole of the last decade is the way that austerity laid the groundwork for Brexit. And then he legged it. He went to Nice and put his trotters up. And the venom with which Danny Dyer speaks, and Dyer is clearly one of those people who is very, very bright, but doesn't think he's got a good grasp of the facts. So I often find that very, very bright people have got a very good grasp. It's like the opposite of Jacob Rees-Mogg syndrome, if you like. Very, very highly educated, but as thick as mince. Someone who doesn't consider themselves to be very, very informed, but demonstrates great salience and acuity every time they open their mouth. And he's dead right to focus on Cameron. Very few people did, even back then, very few people were focusing in, were zoning in on Cameron, who bet our house, that's the point, he bet your future on his own survival, and he lost, and then he cleared off the twerp. So is he going to get away with it? Or has he already got away with it? Do you think that Cameron has somehow managed to evade and avoid responsibility for his role in our national decline? 0345 6060 973. But one way to preempt that question, of course, is to ask, what was Cameron's role? How much responsibility, this is where I really want you to go, how much responsibility does David Cameron bear for the mess that the country and the Conservative Party became post-2015? When he was doing a lap of honour, he was practically one step away from an open-top bus in 2015. And if you measure the country's performance, and certainly the Conservative Party's performance since 2015, And we haven't even touched upon his regrettable associations with various businesses and business interests. How much responsibility, how much of this is on David Cameron, okay? Or, you want to make it really simple, what's the single worst thing he did? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The reason that I think he's got away with it, since you ask, is because when Liz Truss walks into a room, nobody respectable applauds, right? When Boris Johnson walks into a room, Nadine Dorries sets off a party popper and nobody respectable applauds. Johnson's reputation outside the world of unhinged headlines and Nadine Dorries' fever dreams, Johnson's reputation is done for. He's got criminal convictions, chased out of Parliament by his own misdeeds, too cowardly to let the people of Uxbridge decide upon what his future should be. So Johnson's reputation is toast. Truss's reputation is truly ridiculous. Farage continues to bleat nonsense about what a victim he is and how awful foreigners are. And people continue to lap it up. That's the point. That people's opinions of Farage haven't really changed. If you like racism, you like him. If you hate racism, you hate him. Cameron, however, can still, I imagine, walk into respectable gatherings and hold his head high. Whereas, under my analysis, he probably has more to answer for than the rest of them put together. It was the weirdest chapter in How They Broke Britain. It was the weirdest chapter. That and the Cummings chapter, for reasons that I won't go into now. But the Cameron chapter was the weirdest chapter because it felt like a tesseract, you know? I always use that word incorrectly. Let me think of a better example. It felt like a jigsaw, and I hadn't even realised. So I had all these pieces in front of me. There's 10 chapters I wrote originally, 11 in the end for the paperback. So 10 chapters in front of me, and I've got, say, 1,000 jigsaw pieces, and I'm going to do 10 different jigsaws. I had no idea how many pieces of the jigsaw would slot effortlessly into the David Cameron chapter. So, how has he got away with it?